Becoming Gift is on location today.
Good morning, Pat, Dave, and Ron. I'm calling in again from Poland. We're on the final leg of our pilgrimage for the 15th anniversary of Annunciation Radio. This last leg of the pilgrimage, we've been in Krakow. And really spending a good amount of time studying the history of Poland, which isn't odd for a pilgrimage because the history of Poland is Catholic history. The country's been Catholic for over 1,000 years. And much of this part of the pilgrimage, especially for me spiritually, but also in what we've been doing, is focused on Pope St. John Paul II. This town is really covered in John Paul II's history. And honestly, every church I have gone in and prayed, almost all of them have a relic of John Paul II, which has been a real blessing. And this last day, we had Mass at the Pope St. John Paul II shrine, which is right near the Divine Mercy Shrine. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about John Paul II, especially in light of the theme of this segment, Becoming Gift. So much of Pope St. John Paul II's ministry and work as a pope and as an archbishop before that was on the implementation of the Second Vatican Council. As a young bishop, Pope St. John Paul II was actually at the Second Vatican Council and involved in writing many of the documents, but especially the document Gaudium et Spes. And in this document, in paragraph 24, it says, man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. And this is where the name of this segment comes from. But this idea of finding oneself is that man is created in God's image and likeness. And since we're made in God's image and likeness, there's something about us that's different than the rest of creation. There's something about us that is called for more, that is designed for more. You know, we have reason, so we're capable of truth, and we have will, so we're capable of love. And since we can know and love, we're also capable of being a communion of persons, which is another way we're in the image and likeness of God, by being rational, by having free will, and by being capable of being a communion of persons. And it's in fulfilling this image by knowing and loving and becoming a communion that we most become what we are, God's image and likeness. What's interesting, in Pope Paul VI's teaching after the council, there was a ton of controversy about the church's teaching around human relationships, around love and around marriage. And this came to a head with the document Humanae Vitae on human life, where the Pope upheld the continuous teaching of the church against the use of contraception. And interestingly enough, in this document, Paul VI really kind of leaves it a bit open-ended, not the teaching itself. You know, he proclaims definitively the church's consistent teaching throughout the ages against the use of contraception. But what he does leave open is he said the church needs a more adequate anthropology in these modern times in order to help people understand and live this teaching. And this is a big piece of what Pope St. John Paul II's work was all about. As a young priest, he would be deeply involved in people's lives. He called them his środowisko. And his środowisko, which is almost like a word for family, they're these young couples, young people that he would gather around himself, and they would live life together. They would share meals, meaningful conversations. And I think the highlight of their time was going on vacation together, especially out into the wilderness, going camping, going kayaking, going hiking. And through these relationships and his theological and philosophical studies, because Pope St. John Paul II had doctoral degrees in mystical theology at St. John the Cross, and also in ethics. So Pope St. John Paul II was coming at this idea of human love and relationships, both from having the experience of working with these young couples to, we're having all these questions, discerning their vocations, getting married, starting to have families, and all the struggles and joys and everything else that comes with that young life, mixed with his rich and deep and vast studies and knowledge about understanding human love and relationships. And he wrote a philosophical work as a priest called Love and Responsibility, where he explores really richly the mysteries of human love from a philosophical angle. And then he was working on a theological reflection on the same topic. Actually, he was ready to publish it about the time he was elected pope. And we often call these reflections the theology of the body. And instead of publishing this work as a book, he decided to deliver it as a set of Wednesday audiences. And these teachings were, in a sense, an adequate anthropology. He was answering Pope Paul VI's call. So where the theology of the body ultimately ends up is answering the same questions that Humanae Vitae did about the morality of marriage and about the morality of contraception. But it's an adequate anthropology. And that word anthropology is simply the study of man, the study of what it means to be human. So this means that the insight in the humanity that Pope St. John Paul II has can be applied to any number of topics. And much of my curiosity and interest is taking this adequate anthropology and applying it to this idea of health and wellness in relationship to holiness. One of the key quotes from the Theology of the Body from an audience that Pope St. John Paul II delivered on February 20th of 1980 is this. He said, "The body and it alone is capable of making visible what is invisible, the spiritual and the divine. It was created to transfer into the visible reality of the world the mystery hidden since time immemorial in God, God's love for man, and thus to be a sign of it." So the body alone is capable of making visible the invisible. Why is this the case? Well, we as humans are uniquely physical and spiritual, with a rational soul and a will. The beings that are created higher than us, the angels, don't have a body. Of course, Jesus in his incarnation in a special way does this, but really takes what humanity is called to from the beginning to a higher pitch through what we call in the church the sacramental order. So one of the ways that the church expresses this beautiful idea that the body reveals the spirit is that the body is a sacramental reality, that the body is the sacrament of the soul, that we experience the spiritual through the body. But even more so, the body isn't just called to make visible our soul. The body is also called to make visible God himself. The body is called to be a sign of God's love for man. And this is the nuptial meaning of the body. This is the central idea of the theology of the body, that the body reveals God's love through our love for another person. By entering this kind of loving relationship, we become a sign of love, but it's not just for others. We also, like Gaudium et Spes said, we will sincerely find ourselves in that gift. We will become who we're truly called to be, and to be what we're called to be is simply a great philosophical definition for joy.